I am recording Union Gospel Presses Sunday School Lesson number 3, Sunday, September 15th, 2024. The lesson is entitled Daniel's Friends Trust God. Lesson text comes from Daniel chapter 3, verses 19 through 28. Related scriptures are Isaiah 43, 1 through 7, Daniel 6, 19 through 27. The place is Babylon. The time is about 587 BC. Living in 21st century America, it is difficult, if not impossible, to comprehend the power possessed by Nebuchadnezzar. He had, in effect, unlimited power. His desires were always fulfilled, his enemies were always killed, and his authority was never questioned. He was a brutal man living in a culture that often regarded human life as insignificant. No one argued with Nebuchadnezzar or disputed his orders. The Babylonian army likewise was ruthless. They inspired fear in the surrounding nations when they approached. Today's aim, facts. To understand the culture of Babylon, emphasizing the complete dominance Nebuchadnezzar had over his subjects. Principle. To explain and illustrate Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's total dependence on God. Application. To challenge each student to realize that the God who delivered the three young men from the furnace can likewise deliver them from distressing circumstances. Illustrating the lesson. Whenever we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, we can be confident that the Lord is with us, just as he was with the three Hebrews. The word resonates with us. Fear not, for I am with you. Practical points. 1. Bold faith reveals and provokes God's enemies, Daniel 3:19. 2. Opposition is not always the result of our wrongdoing, verse 20. 3. Our enemies cannot bind what God has set free, verses 21 through 22. 4. Even in our greatest trials, God is present with us and is in control, verses 23 through 25. 5. God's power and protection exceed our understanding, verse 26. 6. Our trials provide opportunities to trust God and see his power at work in our lives, verse 27. 7. God uses our trials for his glory so that even his enemies acknowledge his power, verse 28. Golden text. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Daniel 3:28. Today we have two lesson outlines. The first is an angry enemy, Daniel 3:19 through 23. The second is a changed king, Daniel 3:24 through 28. Introduction. The life of King Nebuchadnezzar in the first 4 chapters of the book of Daniel gives us a picture of how God works in people's hearts to bring them to the point of realizing the need for a relationship with him. In Daniel 1, Nebuchadnezzar encountered 4 young men who caused him to recognize the work of God in their lives. Daniel 2, he saw Daniel do something none of his wise men could do and realized Daniel served a God who was superior to his own gods. In the 3rd chapter, he was forced to recognize that no other God can do the things God does. Daniel is not present in chapter 3, and we are not told why. As we read last week, Nebuchadnezzar had a huge gold image made, invited all the kingdom's leaders to come for its dedication, and insisted they bow before it or be burned alive in a furnace. Whether the image represented the king, his kingdom, or a Babylonian deity, Daniel's 3 friends could not honor the order, for it commanded idolatry. Their refusal led to Nebuchadnezzar's fury as they stood and faced him. An angry enemy, Daniel 3:19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. Verse 20. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Verse 21. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew these men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse 23. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Irrational fury, Daniel 3:19 through 20. Can we see any reason why the Lord would allow these 3 dedicated men to go through this trial? The devil tempts us to destroy our faith, but God tests us to develop our faith, because a faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. False faith withers in times of trial, but true faith takes deeper root, grows, and brings glory to God. This explains why God permitted the 3 Hebrew men to be tested and then thrown into the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar was furious with these men over their refusal to worship the image. But when they were brought to him and he heard their determination to stay true to God and trust him to deliver them from the fire, he became even more enraged. Even his face was distorted by his rage. This was followed by a completely irrational order to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. This was probably a proverbial expression meaning to make it as hot as possible. Nebuchadnezzar's pride caused this ridiculous outburst. As king over the mighty Babylonian Empire, he demanded to be respected and honored. To have someone defy him was more than he could take. Pride has this kind of effect on people. When they are thwarted in any way, they will lash out at those they see as hindering them. We see this in the dog-eat-dog world of politics, entertainment, and our personal lives. If Nebuchadnezzar had been rational in his thinking, he would have realized that making a furnace much hotter would serve only to bring a more rapid release from the pain of burning instead of prolonging the agony. A cooler furnace would be more effective in its torture. But the king commanded some of his mighty military men to bind the 3 Israelites and toss them into the fiery furnace. Unexpected deaths, Daniel 3:21 through 22. The expression given is that everything was done as quickly as possible. Some have suggested that the king left the 3 men fully clothed for the flames to be more effective in burning their bodies. But more likely he was so angry that he had everything done immediately. The text may also include this detail because their clothing later gives evidence of the completeness of God's miraculous work. Verse 27. It was the right of any Babylonian king to order and carry out whatever he wished. History tells us that Babylonian monarchs were absolutely sovereign in their kingdoms. Once those kings issued an order, it could not be changed, and no one dared to defy it. Nebuchadnezzar's authority was later described by Daniel to Belshazzar. The Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he slew, and whom he would, he kept alive, and whom he would, he set up, and whom he would, he put down. Daniel 5:18 through 19. There was no questioning his decisions. Nebuchadnezzar's command to his soldiers was urgent and severe. All they could do was carry out his demands as quickly and efficiently as possible. The furnace was heating excessively, as he had demanded, and his men took up the 3 Jews to throw them in. We can imagine that this must have been a fearful assignment for the soldiers when they felt the intense heat emanating from the furnace. They had no choice, however, but to carry out the demands of Nebuchadnezzar. In doing so, they gave their lives. The flames of the fire shot outward and immediately burned them to death. Unless one has seen another person go completely berserk with fits of fury, it is difficult to understand Nebuchadnezzar on this occasion. A brilliant architect and great warrior, he could be a man of great compassion and tenderness, but as an absolute monarch, he could not and would not tolerate any defiance of his will. Safe landing, Daniel 3:23. This furnace was probably a smelting furnace made of very thick adobe or brick and able to withstand intense heat. Near the ground was an opening for putting in wood and charcoal, and near the top was a large opening for putting in the ore to be melted. There were probably holes in the side for bellows to make the fire hotter. It would have been the top opening through which the fire roared. So when the military men approached with the 3 Jews, they were instantly killed. It made no difference that Nebuchadnezzar had ordered the furnace heated to a much hotter degree, for the Israelite men were totally unaffected by the flames or heat. While Nebuchadnezzar was losing valuable men who only went near the furnace, these 3 went all the way into the furnace and were safe. Bound with ropes, they fell into the center of the roaring furnace, but they were completely untouched by the fire. In a furnace heated as hot as this one, their deaths should have been nearly instantaneous. But instead, they fell down alive and intact with the ropes still around them. The ropes did not last long, however. Soon they were on their feet and walking around on the furnace floor while the flames raged all around them. Everything about this reveals a miraculous intervention by God. A changed king, verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. Verse 25. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. Verse 27. And the princesses and governors and captains and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Astonishment, Daniel 3:24 through 25. Suddenly, while Nebuchadnezzar sat upon his throne, observing the grisly proceedings, he saw something that made him leap to his feet in a most unkingly manner. He was probably a safe distance away after witnessing the deaths of his mighty men, but obviously he could still see inside the furnace. His astonishment no doubt began when he saw the three men fall safely to the floor of the furnace alive. But then something else happened, causing him to ask, "Did not we cast three men bound into the midst of the fire?" Verse 24. When his counselors responded in the affirmative, Nebuchadnezzar related to them what he was observing. He saw four men in the furnace, not three, walking around freely without bonds. They were moving around in the center of the flames, not on the outer fringes trying to escape. What he saw was a picture of perfect peace rather than panic or trauma. The king also saw that they were unhurt, which seemed impossible considering where they were. As they calmly walked around in those flames, they were completely unharmed. Of even greater astonishment to Nebuchadnezzar was the appearance of the fourth man, whom he described as some kind of divine being, Daniel 3:25. His comment, "The form of the fourth is like the Son of God," indicates recognition of someone supernatural. Although it cannot be proved from the text, there is some reason to believe this was a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. Being the polytheistic pagan that he was, Nebuchadnezzar probably did not have this in mind. However, the king's words can also be translated a son of the gods, and this rendering seems to fit better with his beliefs. Nevertheless, he knew he was witnessing someone supernatural and distinct from the condemned men. Protection. Daniel 3:26 through 27. As Nebuchadnezzar stepped nearer to the opening of the furnace, he called out to the three, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth." Verse 26. He used their Babylonian names, but this did not seem to bother them. The amazing part of Nebuchadnezzar's statement was his reference to them as the servants of the Most High God. This was a totally new attitude, one not evident in his earlier question at the end of verse 15. This time, the three Jews obeyed him instantly. The mysterious fourth person disappeared just as quickly as he had appeared, so only three men stepped into Nebuchadnezzar's presence. They certainly had no reason to fear him. The title Most High God refers to the Lord in terms of his strength and sovereignty. It is used numerous times in Daniel, but for Nebuchadnezzar to use it is most surprising. Clearly, God's might had impressed him and had perhaps begun to change him. As the king's important leaders gathered around the young men, they observed how the men had been miraculously preserved. Now we see why the text made a point earlier in mentioning that they were thrown into the furnace fully clothed, because every article of clothing was still in place and unaffected by the fire. In fact, their hair had not been singed, and the smell of smoke was not on them. They came to understand for themselves what God could save the three Nebuchadnezzar's hand, saved from Nebuchadnezzar's hand. God's deliverance of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was a great victory of faith for the Jews in captivity. They were protected from harm. They were comforted in trial. God was glorified and they were rewarded. Let us determine to be true to God, no matter how difficult the pressure or punishment. God's protection transcends anything we could imagine. Proclamation, Daniel 3:28. Nebuchadnezzar had previously admitted that Israel's God, Yahweh, was a superior God in his ability to reveal mysteries, 2:47. Now he recognized Yahweh's superior power because he had delivered the condemned men from the king's hand. Nebuchadnezzar's words affirmed God's superiority and recognized his worthiness to be praised. He saw that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had completely trusted God and that he had responded to their trust with deliverance. He also saw their devotion to God was so deep that they willingly risked their lives out of loyalty to him, even when it meant they had to stand against the word of the king himself. This was something he had never seen before. The example of these three men is important today, since the culture in which we live is turning more and more against believers. There are many people we have contact with regularly who need to see this kind of trust, devotion, and loyalty to God. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16. We need to see more than just a historical account in this chapter. We need to see a challenge that should become a reality for us. God is still the same God who protected these young men. We can trust him just as they did. Not every believer, of course, is miraculously delivered. Many are ushered into God's presence as martyrs. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego understood this, Daniel 3:18. They were gladly willing to give their lives for God if that was his will. While most of us will probably not be killed for our faith in Christ, all true disciples will face persecution of one kind or another. 2 Timothy 3:12. And all the more often as the time of Christ's return draws near. In whatever way the word might attack us, let us draw near in faith to God so that we may resolve to stand firm for the Lord. Questions. 1. What did God accomplish in allowing his three servants to go through such a trial? 2. What caused the king to become even more angry than before? 3. Why was Nebuchadnezzar's decree foolish? 4. What indicates the king's eagerness in this matter, and what loss did this result in for him? 5. What did the king initially see happening when the men landed in the furnace? 6. What did he observe as he kept looking into the furnace? 7. What did Nebuchadnezzar think about the fourth man? 8. What did everybody observe as the men came out of the fire? 9. What was the king's new understanding about God? 10. In what way is this incident more than historical to us? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, September 15, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.